let's get into the Raiders side of things, Mike. The Raiders have hired Antonio Pierce as their head coach. How are you feeling?
I feel great. Feel excited. Feel a little mixed in a certain aspect. Not because of him, but because of the process in which that they hired him, the Raiders.
And that's all the time we have today. I'm just playing. No, sorry, Mike. We have been talking about this for several weeks. We've given everything that we have in terms of why they should hire Antonio Pierce or not hire Antonio Pierce. Go on. I'm so sorry I interrupted you.
No, you're good. You're good.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have notes. So I'll just go through the notes. As I mentioned, I have mixed feelings about the process in which the Raiders hired Antonio Pierce. Raiders interviewed two other candidates this past Tuesday. Raiders ended up hiring Antonio Pierce on Friday. Raiders interviewed Leslie Frazier, former, I want to say, I get it mixed up. I want to say Vikings head coach, former Bills defensive coordinator, out of the league last year. I think he was the Bills defensive coordinator, obviously not this season, but maybe a season ago, and he stepped away. And then the day after we had our last podcast last Monday, the next day, Tuesday, Chris Richard was interviewed for the head coaching vacancy. Okay. Chris Richard, former defensive coordinator, I want to say for the Seahawks or the Saints. I might be getting that mixed up. I know he was on the coaching staffs for both teams. But by no means is he a real candidate to be a head coach in today's NFL. In fact, I guarantee you no other team has interviewed him for their head coaching vacancies, right? So what did the Raiders do? Antonio Pierce had interviewed with the Raiders the day prior to these two interviews. What did the Raiders do here? Okay. They satisfied two things that they needed to satisfy. The two things that they needed to. One, let's be honest here, the Rooney Rule. They interviewed two candidates of color. And then the other aspect is these two candidates, not through the Rooney Rule, but just in general, they have to interview two candidates from outside of the building for the vacant head coach position. In two interviews, they knocked out both, things that they needed to do. So, my opinion, once they came out and announced the Raiders interviewed Chris Richard, I'm just going to be honest. Once I saw a picture of him and I had never even heard of his name, I said, well, they're hiring Pierce. It's a matter of not if, it's when. And when came on Friday. They didn't interview anybody else. No decision yet at GM. I was told by the media that Mark Davis was going to hire a GM first. And here we are. It's Monday, the 22nd, and we still don't have a GM hired. And there were reports, and I think they're true, that Champ Kelly was sitting in on these head coach interviews. So why isn't he the GM? If he's helping in the process of hiring eventually Antonio Pierce, but also talking to Leslie Frazier and Chris Richard, it's like, why isn't he the GM? What is the holdup there? We'll get to that later. Here's the big one that I'm sure, Josh, you're biting your lip on. According to Vic Tafur from The Athletic, the Raiders reached out to Jim Harbaugh's agent.
Whoa!
At some point during the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't give any context. In fact, I think I might have sent it to you if you want to look at the tweets that I sent you.
Okay. I'll pull it up.
Because I know there are going to be tweets that I want you to pull up here and there. He didn't give any context as to whether the Raiders decided not to bring him in for an interview based on reaching out to his agent, or if Harbaugh just relayed to the Raiders, not interested. No idea. There is not a single crumb of whether he was uninterested or if the Raiders were uninterested. I mean, clearly reaching out means that they were interested, but maybe there were some words exchanged that told one of the two sides, I don't want to do it. So that's all Vic Tafur gave, was they talked to his agent. Okay. I can have a little bit of I can feel a little better about this process, knowing that they at least reached out to the one guy that we would argue was the better candidate than Antonio Pierce. For me, that's very arguable. For you, definitive, right? So yeah, that's really that as far as Antonio Pierce getting hired. I know I don't sound that excited. It's been days. I've gotten to kind of soak it in and feel good about it. And I'll get into the positives. I'll also get into the negatives. But I am excited. I'm very happy over the fact that this Raiders team, the locker room, and its fans have the coach that they wanted. And I really want to believe that Mark Davis was all in from the jump on Antonio Pierce. Reaching out to Harbaugh kind of takes away from that. And then you also have this aspect of Max Crosby going out to the media and saying, hey, all things are on the table if they don't keep Pierce. Vic Tafur, I don't know if I sent it to you, but Vic Tafur has tweeted since that apparently Max Crosby knew all along that it was going to be Antonio Pierce. Maybe it was a very in-house thing that, it's going to be Pierce. Don't worry about it, guys. But if that's the case, why would you allow Max Crosby to put out a bad PR spin on the hiring process? Because what it makes it look like to every other fan and media person in the league is that Max Crosby affected the decision to hire Antonio Pierce and not, hire somebody else, right? Oh, the Raiders got scared off. They let their players take over. That's not what happened, but that's what it looks like through Max Crosby kind of toying with it, and letting it get public. It's like, keep that shit in house. Even if it was a joke. I don't know what it was, but don't mess with PR. That's just a stupid look. It really makes the Raiders look stupid. As you see on the screen, Antonio Pierce's candidacy, he was very clear that he knows what he doesn't know and plans to bring in top people to cover his blind spots. Names like Marvin Lewis and Tom Coughlin were raised to cover the experience gap. Here's an interesting thing. During the bye week, I never mentioned this on the podcast. During the bye week for the Raiders before the Vikings game, Antonio Pierce brought in 3 guys, former head coaches in the league, to help kind of give him some pointers on how to finish out the season, right? He brought in Marvin Lewis, Tom Coughlin, and Adam Gase. Okay. Those first 2 names, sweet. Adam Gase, let's keep him away from here, please. But okay, I'll give him credit for, bringing in multiple people and like, hey, from your experience, blah, 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 right? Cool. Let's get into the positives and negatives of hiring Antonio Pierce early. In my opinion, you had Gerard Mayo from the Patriots. That was an in-house, already built into his contract. He's going to, supplant Belichick whenever that comes. Boom. They had it set in stone, ready to go. Got it done. They didn't even need to interview anybody else. The Raiders, they kind of make a mockery of the Rooney Rule. They get Pierce, right? Let's go through the negatives. The Raiders didn't seem to do their due diligence that Mark Davis promised in the head coaching, hiring process. They didn't have any interviews with coaches like Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, Bucs offensive coordinator Dave Canales, Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick, Bengals offensive coordinator who was just hired by the Tennessee Titans, Brian Callahan, or Dolphins offensive coordinator Frank Smith. Why is that a negative? Because the Raiders could have got them in the building and at the very least asked them, what would you do to turn this team around? What would you do to turn this offense around? You had Champ Kelly in the room, apparently. What if it's an inside knowledge that Antonio Pierce is getting the job? Who cares? Why not ask them these questions, take notes, hire Antonio Pierce, and then go, all right, well, now we have some ideas of what we could do, what sort of systems we could run.
I'll tell you why that's irrelevant, Mike. I don't think that's relevant. If you're going to bring them in and ask them what their plan is to turn around this team, and you like their plan more than Antonio Pierce's plan, then maybe you shouldn't hire Antonio Pierce.
But
That's
not if they
assuming that
already
Antonio Pierce doesn't have a plan.
right. I think this is my gut speaking here. I don't think the Raiders were hiring Pierce based off of his plan. I think they were hiring Pierce based off of what he said in his final press conference at the end of the season after the Broncos game. It was called the Donkeys. A reporter asked him, "Do you think that you deserve the head coaching job moving forward?" And his answer was, "I wouldn't say deserve. I hope that I've earned it." And I think he earned it. I think that what he did in turning around the culture and getting all the players to buy in for the first time in fuck knows how long, yeah, he deserves it. He deserves his shot. You can bring in an offensive coordinator to implement an offense because that's what held us back. I think, okay, can you actually put up the top tweet that I sent you? Most recent top tweet, like at the top. It's going to be a picture. There it is. Since Antonio Pierce took over as the interim GM, or interim head coach for the Raiders, it's from PFF. On defense, 16.0 points per game allowed, first in the league. 30 sacks over however many weeks from midseason, third. 4 defensive touchdowns. That's kind of a gimme. You know, that's not sustainable, but still first in the league with 4 touchdowns. 31 penalties, fewest in the league. Plus 62-point differential, 4th in the league. That's with a shitty offense. I mean, the 62 or 63-point game against the Chargers, that helps, but the Chargers also put 21 points up in that game, which is more than our points per game average given up by the defense. The team was killing it with Pierce. It's not a question. The offense just held it back. You give them a full season with that right there, with that tweet right there, 16.0 points per game allowed. All I'm used to as a Raider fan is 30 points per game allowed. And our offense scoring 28 points per game and just barely losing 7-9. The cycle continues. We've talked about it multiple times. They never get that top pick because they're just good enough to win those games that they should, lose the games that they should. They never get it. It's just, it feels like with Antonio Pierce, it's a little different. So my point here is just, you said if one of these offensive coordinators comes in and has a better plan, it's like, to me, it wasn't about the plan. It's about Antonio Pierce being, he earned it. Point blank, period. The way that the team performed under him is undeniable. And it's not guaranteed that any of these offensive coordinators can come in and have the buy-in that Antonio Pierce did immediately. Not guaranteed. And it's also very likely that your defensive staff is lost, and then your defense doesn't do what is on the screen right now with one of these offensive coordinators, right? And again, that was my point with Harbaugh, is like, that's the risk. That's what I don't like. We want continuity here. Continuity. We want continuity here. And hopefully they're getting that. It's just a matter of who the hell is going to be their offensive coordinator. So, just to continue, as far as those offensive coordinators go, the Raiders couldn't interview those coaches in person until today, right? Until after the divisional round of the playoffs. For any coach that is still in, on a roster, on a team, whatever you want to call it. But they
Like
could
in
have
a team
interviewed.
that's not eliminated?
Correct. Well, I think if they were currently or at the end of the season on an NFL team, they could not be interviewed in person. I don't know. It might be that they have to be, if they're in the playoffs, it can't be until. But okay, what makes sense to me? Let's just for a second to take off the Raiders. What is more fair? I don't fucking know the actual rule of this, but you have Dave Canales on the Buccaneers, right? To the Buccaneers, it's not fair if he goes and does an in-person interview with the Panthers, right? When he's on game week, right? It's like, we got to focus on the game, dude. Doing a little 30-minute to 1 hour, interview like this on Zoom, not the worst thing in the world. He's already done his executing for the day, at practice and all that. But if a team like the Panthers could go and interview the coach from the Jaguars, who were eliminated from the playoffs, they could get him in the building in person. Boom, within 2 days, they interview 2 other guys, they hire him, right? Is that fair to a team like, let's say the Raiders, let's just say for reference, or the Titans? They want to interview Ben Johnson, but they can't yet because he's in the playoffs. But they really like that guy from the Jaguars. Well, the Panthers just up and hired him, while the Titans were 2 steps behind the Panthers because they were waiting for Ben Johnson to exit the playoffs. The rule should be, if you are currently on a team, you cannot have an in-person interview with another team until after the divisional round, just like the playoff teams, non-playoff. That should be fair, because these teams that are looking for a new coach, they should be in the same line. They should be in the same process, like as far as timing goes, they should be in the same stages as each other. That's where hiring Pierce early could potentially give the Raiders an advantage, because it's like, hey, we can go get our offensive coordinator now, whereas the Chargers just now, the Titans, but all these teams that don't have a head coach yet, they can't get their offensive coordinator until they get their coach, right? So in theory, the Raiders, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is a positive for the Raiders. Getting Pierce early, you can get your offensive coordinator before these other teams start looking. But is that fair? I guess it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I guess I'll get into my positives. I do think the Raiders made the right decision. They don't waste any time doing so. And they also don't allow Pierce the opportunity to leave and go to the Titans or go to the Falcons, who he had interviews with. And again, now that they have their head coach, they can now look for an offensive coordinator. So before we move on to coaching staff updates, do you have any lasting thoughts on Antonio Pierce being hired?
Well, all right. I want to say this. I think it was a good hire. I know that I have been of the opinion that I think Jim Harbaugh was the best candidate available, but it's not even a guarantee that Harbaugh will come out of, coaching college football in order to become an NFL head coach. Clearly, it would appear as though Jim Harbaugh was not interested in coming to the Raiders. So if Harbaugh isn't going to come to the Raiders, then I don't see why you don't hire Antonio Pierce.
Right.
That was my feeling.
Yeah.
This brings me to my next question, or I guess my first question. How long is the contract for Antonio Pierce? Did they say how long it is?
They haven't said how long. You also have to bear in mind they haven't had an introductory press conference. And that's why, again, the whole they're going to hire the GM first thing is throwing me off, because it's like, when they hired McDaniels, they hired Ziegler with him, and they had a press conference with both of them at the podium. I think that's what they want to do. And also, as far as, Antonio Pierce being hired, the Raiders did announce it, and they put out a statement, but, when it was announced, like, oh, Antonio Pierce is being hired, it was like, it wasn't he is hired, it's the Raiders are finalizing a deal with Antonio Pierce. So I wonder if it's not pen to paper yet until the GM also puts pen to paper. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I too am curious how long the deal will be.
So my question for you, Mike, is, all right, however many years that this deal is, the Raiders players vouch for Antonio Pierce harder than I think I remember any NFL team vouching for a coach that they wanted to retain. I know the Panthers, they vouched for Steve Wilkes and wanted to retain him as coach, but not to this degree. If the Raiders do not improve and make the playoffs this year, what do you do with Antonio Pierce going forward? And again, to all the Raider fans watching at home, I know this is way too early to even discuss, but I'm just thinking big picture. Like, you kind of have to think about this if you're Mark Davis, like as an owner, right? Like you're honoring what your players wanted. But if that doesn't work out, like, your players wanted this and asked for this. You essentially, in my opinion, is it a wasted season if they don't make the playoffs? What do you do? What do you do from there?
Yeah, I think the way that I felt about Pierce is, and I think we've said this before, is like give him 2 years. And that's not me saying next year is okay if they don't make the playoffs. Like with how close they got after a 3-5 start under McDaniels and having to completely switch up the offense and blah, 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 blah. I'm expecting the playoffs next year. I am. And if we don't make it, yeah, I'll be let down. I think I will have to judge the season accordingly. It's too early to tell, like you mentioned, because I do expect a lot of turnover on offense. And that might take a year to properly implement, for all we know. Maybe we get a rookie quarterback. Maybe we get Justin Fields. Maybe it's not, all, sunshine and rainbows day one with the offense. It might take a while. It's not like our defense is going to score 4 defensive touchdowns in a 9-week span every year.
Yeah, normally turnovers on offense definitely is not sunshine and rainbows, Mike. I'm just
no.
Your
did
words.
I say offense?
Yeah, well, you said there's going to be turnover on offense, but you were talking about personnel, like turnover.
Yeah, personnel. Yeah,
and
coaching. But here's my other thing.
Difficult. Yeah.
Here's my other thing. If year one they don't make the playoffs, it's an absolute letdown. That sucks. Don't fucking fire them. And the players will be saying it too. No, don't do that. That's stupid. Year two. That's the year for me that's going to be telling. I think that's the year where, okay, year one, let's say we make the playoffs, but we don't win a playoff game. Just like Bazakia, right? Different, but you know what I mean. If year two they go to the playoffs and they win a playoff game, year two is when I'm expecting them to start winning playoff games. That's the way I'll put it.
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't make the playoffs in year two, yeah, let them go. If they make the playoffs but they don't win, it's like, man, they're right there. What are we missing? What are we missing now? Go get it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a big part of it is go get the quarterback. Go get the quarterback
mm-hmm.
and let things work.
Yeah, I guess I just kind of feel like the players vouched for for Antonio Pierce so hard. There should be no excuse why they don't make the playoffs next year. Like, surely you wanted this guy for a reason, because you think that you can win, and if you're thinking this as like a long-term move and this is just the player's decision, sometimes the players don't even know what's best for them. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying Antonio Pierce is not the best decision that they could have made. I don't want that to be misconstrued. I'm just saying, Max Crosby was willing to get himself off the team, or he threatened, I'm not going to be a Raider anymore if it's not Antonio Pierce. Surely you should make the playoffs next year. There shouldn't be, there should be, I would say, no excuses on why you're not in the playoffs. Unless it goes a certain way, you guys get the quarterback. He's young. Like, let's just say you draft Jaden Daniels and maybe struggles at the beginning of the year and then gets hot towards the end of the season. Then I could see it. Also, I don't know if 1 or 2 of my AirPods just died. Can you say something real quick?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll say this really quick. As far as Max Crosby, I want to make it clear. Maybe I should find the tweet and send it to you, but Vic Tafur. Vic Tafur. Wow, that was mixing Tafur and tweet. I'm just gonna find it. I'm gonna send it to you. He said, and maybe I don't want to get it wrong. Okay, yeah. Somebody commented about the whole GM process right now, or maybe the coaching process. I don't know. Vic Tafur put out a tweet. I don't want to get into it yet. And then somebody comments, I thought Max was the GM. being sarcastic. Vic Tafer's response, quote tweeting him, was, "Take it easy on Max. He knew AP was getting the job." If Max Crosby knew for a fact, and maybe Vic Tafer's being sarcastic, maybe, and he's a reporter, he shouldn't do that on Twitter. That's just stupid. But if he's not being sarcastic, if he's not being an asshole, if Max Crosby knew, yes, Antonio Pierce is getting the job, he has assurances from Mark Davis, why do the PR stunt? Why do the stunt to the media? Oh, if they don't keep him, I'm gonna. Well, he never said that he would request a trade. That was leaked from the media.
Mm-hmm.
He should have kept quiet because it makes it look like a bad PR for the Raiders. It makes it look bad. It's like, oh, and then it also looks like, oh, Mark Davis bending over for Max Crosby. It's like, if this was a PR thing or Max Crosby playing with the media or somebody's agent leaking something out, it's very possible this was Antonio Pierce's agent leaking this out. Very possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Thrash also says, if it were the case that Max Crosby knew, then he wouldn't even have to say anything.
Right. Well, he gets asked about it, and he says, bear in mind, on Max Crosby's podcast, and whenever he was asked about it, they asked, if Antonio Pierce isn't the guy, what would you do? Everything's on the table. He never said, I will request a trade. Never said that. That was the media saying Max Crosby reportedly will request a trade or will explore requesting a trade. That was the terminology from Tom Pelissero or whoever it was. That's somebody's agent leaking that out. That's what that is. That was not Max Crosby saying that. Max Crosby said everything's on the table if AP is not the coach. That's what he said on the podcast. That was him responding to a question about that. But he never started this. That was the media and probably somebody's agent, which very well may have been Antonio Pierce's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess to finish off the Antonio Pierce thing, I say since it does not appear that Harbaugh was going to be available for the Raiders, I'm still worried for the Raiders' sake that he might end up in LA, which, come to think of it, I think he might be better off going to the Falcons because he would easily be the best coach in that division. And he wouldn't have to battle Andy Reid and Sean Payton every year. I don't know. Yeah, I think Pierce was a good hire for the Raiders, and we'll see what he does with the team moving forward. Are you ready to move on, or you have one last thought?
One more thing. I didn't get to kind of respond to the, Antonio Pierce has no excuse. I think you put it kind of.
Yeah.
Like, he has no excuse. He has to win, all that. I do agree he needs to go out there and win next year. I think every Raider fan's expectation should be the playoffs next season. But it's contextual. If the Raiders go out there next season and the offense sucks because it's in stage 1 of rebuilding, is that Antonio Pierce's fault? Not really.
I want to clarify. I don't think I said it. I don't think I said Antonio Pierce has no excuse. I think I said the Raiders have no excuse. There's a difference.
Okay, that's right.
Because they're the ones who are vouching for Antonio. And obviously Antonio Pierce is going to vouch for himself. But, the players can't complain that it's the coach's fault. That's the coach you wanted. It's like that one scene from SpongeBob. What was the kid crying about in the car? And then he's like, well, why did you ask for it? Oh, no. The kid had like pistachio ice cream. And he's like, I don't like pistachio ice cream. And then the dad driving the car goes, well, why did you ask for it? It's like that. The Raiders players don't get an excuse. And then Mark Davis, if he just, completely, bowed down to the locker room and, all right, if you guys feel this strongly, Mark Davis, at the end of the day, you're the owner. You're supposed to do what's best for your franchise, even if it's a tough decision in not getting the guy that everybody in the building wants.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on the Raiders players do not have an excuse next season and moving forward with Antonio Pierce. This was their guy. They all vouched for him. All right, let's get it going. The only
Mhm.
the only aspect to me that has an excuse is the offense next season. If it's completely starting over, other than Devontae Adams, Colton Miller, Josh Jacobs potentially, he's a free agent, so we'll see. And a few other players here in the Jacoby Myers. You start over with quarterback. You get a couple new offensive linemen in there, maybe a new running back. That's a lot of, as I mentioned, turnover. We'll see how that goes. If it's a rookie quarterback, it's like I can't expect a rookie quarterback to go out there and be CJ Stroud. I just can't. That's not what it usually is. I can't expect a first-year starter to be like Patrick Mahomes and throw 50 touchdowns. That doesn't happen. Those
Mhm.
guys are special, and I hope we get the next special guy, but we'll see. It might be Justin Fields, and maybe there's a few bumpy roads along the way. But something else that happened with Antonio Pearson, he took over, was the offense got better too. So
Mhm.
right now it's about finding the offense coordinator.